My own mother rejected my kids, so I chose them over her. Before we begin the story, take a moment to support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your support means the world to our channel and helps us spread more shocking true stories to light. Now, let's get started. My kids, Tyler, 9, and Emma, 7, were practically vibrating with excitement in the back seat as we made our way to my parents' house. They adored their grandparents, despite everything, and were eager to see them. Emma had spent the entire morning crafting a handmade card for Grandma, carefully gluing on heart-shaped stickers from her never-ending collection. She was so proud of it. Tyler, my cautious and responsible one, was holding on to a chocolate cheesecake we'd picked up from a fancy downtown bakery, one my mom constantly bragged about to her friends, but always claimed was too rich when it was just us. You know the type. Everything is about appearances. I pulled into my parents' driveway in my 2018 Dodge Durango. It wasn't the flashiest car, but it was paid off and reliable, something I took pride in. As soon as the house came into view, that familiar tightness settled in my stomach. The same feeling I'd had since I was a teenager whenever I had to face them. The house looked exactly as it always had, a perfectly manicured lawn, my dad's prized rose bushes lining the walkway, ones I'd been yelled at for damaging with a baseball when I was 12. Everything outside was pristine. Inside, a different story entirely. I parked behind my sister Melissa's shiny new Audi Q7, a car she'd never admit was leased, and took a deep breath. "All right, troops," I said, meeting my kids' eyes in the rearview mirror. "Remember what we talked about. Best behavior. And if anything makes you uncomfortable." Tyler and Emma both tugged their earlobes in unison, our secret signal. The last visit had been a disaster, with my dad berating Tyler's little league batting stance for a solid 20 minutes until the poor kid ended up in tears. We weren't going to let that happen again. We stepped onto the porch and knocked. Within seconds, my mother, Diane, opened the door. She was dressed in one of her church outfits, pearls and all, even though this was just a family dinner. Her hair had that freshly dyed, trying too hard blonde shade that older women use to hide their gray. Her smile faltered the moment she saw my kids standing beside me. She stepped forward, lowering her voice. "Jack, we weren't expecting the children." Her strong perfume stung my nose. I frowned. "We talked about this on Tuesday. I specifically said I was bringing them." She glanced nervously over her shoulder before whispering, "We only set places for the adults and Melissa's kids. There simply isn't enough room." I looked past her. The dining table was perfectly set. At the head sat my father, Richard. My sister Melissa and her 3 kids were already seated. My grip tightened on the cheesecake. Not enough room. For my kids. But somehow for Melissa's? Always enough. I felt something inside me shift. I'd spent nearly 4 decades trying to win my parents' approval. But at that moment, standing on that threshold with my son and daughter beside me, I realized something. I wasn't the child in this equation anymore. I was a father, and my children deserved better. A line drawn in stone. For a moment, I just stood there, gripping the cheesecake, so hard my fingers left imprints in the plastic container. My kids, my innocent, loving kids, stood awkwardly on the porch, looking up at me, waiting for me to fix this. I glanced at my mother, then passed her to the dining table. My father sat at the head, his presence looming even from across the room. Melissa, the golden child, was seated comfortably with her kids, their plates already set. But for mine, no room. I took a deep breath, steadying the storm rising in my chest. "This isn't about seating, Mom," I said, my voice cold and measured. "It's about the fact that my children are never actually welcome here." "That's not true," she said quickly, forcing that artificial smile back on her face. "It's just, we planned this for adults. A proper dinner. You understand, don't you?" I felt Tyler shift beside me. His grip tightened around the cheesecake. Emma, still clutching her handmade card, looked confused. Hurt. That was it. That was the moment. 20 years of bending over backward for them. 2 decades of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. Years of financial support, of covering their emergencies, of being their safety net, while Melissa got all the love, all the praise, all the acceptance. And now, they were doing it to my children. No, not anymore. We're leaving, I said, my voice steady, stronger than I expected. Diane's manicured hand clamped down on my forearm, her nails digging into my skin. Jack, she hissed, her voice laced with that sickly sweet manipulation she always used in front of others. Don't be ridiculous. I met her gaze, unflinching. I'm not being ridiculous, I said. I'm being a father. I turned to my kids. Come on, troops. Let's go. Tyler hesitated, glancing between me and his grandmother. He didn't understand what was happening. Not yet, but he would in time. Emma, still clutching her card, looked up at me. But Daddy, I crouched down to her level, brushing her hair behind her ear. We'll go somewhere else, sweetheart. Somewhere that actually wants us there. She nodded slowly, trusting me, believing in me. I stood, ready to walk away, but my mother's grip tightened. Her voice dropped into a dangerous whisper. Jack, you don't mean that. I looked her dead in the eyes. I do. Then for the first time in my life, I chose myself. I'm done, Mom, I said. And starting today, I'm no longer paying your mortgage. Silence. The kind that sucks all the air from a room. From across the dining table, I heard the sharp clatter of a fork dropping onto a plate. My father's deep, commanding voice cut through the tension. What did you just say to your mother? I turned to him, standing tall. You heard me. His eyes burned with the same fury I'd grown up fearing. Richard Thompson was a man whose presence alone could make a grown adult flinch. At 67, his hair had gone mostly gray, but he still had that linebacker build from his college football days. Thick forearms, a body worn from years as a construction foreman, a voice that could level a room. For years, he had towered over me. For years, I had let him. But I wasn't a scared kid anymore. You're not serious. Melissa scoffed from her seat. You're actually throwing a tantrum over a seating arrangement? You always were so damn sensitive. I turned to my sister, the golden child, the one who had never faced consequences, the one who had been bailed out of every mistake, every poor decision, every reckless act. This isn't about chairs, Melissa, I said, my voice like steel. It's about 20 years of being used like a goddamn ATM while being treated like an outsider in my own family. Her lips twisted into a smirk. Oh, come on. You've always had a victim complex. I let out a breath. A long, slow exhale. This was who they were. And I was done. I turned back to my father, who was now standing, his face turning that familiar, dangerous shade of red. After everything we've sacrificed for you, he growled. I laughed. Actually laughed. It felt amazing, like I had finally cut the last tether holding me down. What exactly have you sacrificed? I asked, shaking my head. Because from where I'm standing, all you've done is take my money while making my children feel like they don't belong. Richard took a step forward. You ungrateful little. I didn't give him the chance to finish. I reached for my kids' hands. Come on, guys, I said, my voice calm. Final. Tyler's small hand gripped mine. Emma tucked her card under her arm and held onto my other hand. As we stepped off the porch, my mother's panicked whisper reached my ears. Richard, she breathed. What are we going to do? Not, what are we done? Not, how we fix this? No, they weren't upset about losing me. They were terrified of losing my money. In the car, Emma's small voice broke the silence. Daddy, why doesn't Grandma like us? A lump formed in my throat. Tyler, bless him, put his arm around his little sister. 9 years old and already wiser than the adults at that table. It's not you, sweetheart, he said gently. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that have nothing to do with kids. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles going white. Inside, I made a vow. Never again. Never again would my children grow up feeling like they had to earn love. Never again would they feel like outsiders in their own family. The cycle ended with me. The breaking point. Laura was waiting in the car when we pulled into the driveway. She had stopped coming to these family dinners months ago. After one too many of my mother's passive-aggressive jabs about her parenting, I put the car in park, my hands still tight around the wheel. That was fast, she said, glancing at the kids' confused expressions. What happened? I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. The weight of what I had just done, what I had finally done, was still settling in my chest. She must have seen it in my face. I'll explain later, I murmured. Right now, who wants 5 guys? From a back seat, the kids let out a cheer. At least something good would come out of tonight. I pulled out of the driveway, my mind racing. Had I really just cut them off? After all these years? Part of me was terrified. Another part, one that had been buried for decades, felt something dangerously close to relief. The first week passed in blessed silence. No phone calls from my parents. No fake concern. No manipulative guilt trips. Melissa, however, had other plans. Her text started out with passive-aggressive jabs. Wow, overreact much. Hope you're happy, Jack. You broke Mom's heart. Then came the guilt trips. You always were selfish. Laura's turned you against your real family. And finally, the outright verbal abuse. You're a pathetic excuse for a son. After everything Mom and Dad did for you, this is how you repay them? I blocked her. I had spent 38 years trying to earn love from a family that saw me as nothing more than a walking bank account. No more. Then, the inevitable call came. My mother. Diane's voice was thick with desperation. Jack, she said the moment I picked up, Melissa's been let go from her job. I didn't react. I knew where this was going. They're accusing her of stealing from the company, she continued, her voice high and frantic. Your father and I, we need your help. Of course they did. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Laura, who was folding laundry across the room, looked up. Not calling to apologize, I said, shaking my head. Just calling because you need cash. She was falsely accused. My mother snapped, as if I was the problem here. And now we can't make the mortgage payment. Melissa was helping us. And now, wait. I sat up straighter. Melissa was helping you? Silence. And suddenly, everything clicked. For years, I had been sending them money to cover their mortgage, thinking they needed it. And the entire time, they had been double-dipping, taking money from me and Melissa. Except now, Melissa had lost her job, and her safety net had disappeared. I exhaled slowly. Unbelievable. We need $3,800 by Thursday, Diane continued, her voice tight. I let the words sit in the air for a long moment before I spoke. No. Silence. A beat passed. Then, what do you mean, no? I mean exactly what I said. I'm done. Not another cent. Her voice shot up an octave. We'll lose the house. For so many years, that panic would have been enough. It would have burrowed deep into my chest, wrapping itself around my sense of obligation, my deeply ingrained guilt, my desperate need to please them. Not this time. Then you'll lose the house, I said simply, and I hung up. Laura sat beside me on the couch, her hand resting gently on my knee. You okay? I took a deep breath. The strangest thing was, I didn't feel guilty. I felt light. Yeah, I said slowly. I think I finally am. That night, over dinner, I told Laura everything. What happened at my parents' house. The phone call. The years of financial manipulation I had let continue. She twirled spaghetti around her fork, listening without interrupting. When I finally finished, she set her fork down and met my eyes. You know they're going to escalate, right? She said softly. I nodded. I know. This isn't going to be the end of it. I know. I repeated. But I'm done. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. It's about time. For the first time in my life, I believed it. I wasn't their puppet anymore. A few days later, the phone rang again. It was 10:30 p.m. Diane. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Then, something deep in my gut told me I should. I picked up. Jack, she sobbed, her voice raw. It's your father. He's clutching his chest. What should I do? Every muscle in my body went rigid. Call 911, Mom. Right now. But ambulances cost a fortune, she wailed. Can't you just drive him? You're only 20 minutes away. I stood in my hallway, keys in hand, stunned silent. Even now, when my father might be having a heart attack, she was worried about money. It was so typical that I almost laughed. Call the goddamn ambulance, I snapped. I'll meet you at the hospital. And I hung up. The ER was chaos. Drunken college kids. Crying children. Nurses rushing from room to room. I spotted my mother in the waiting area, dabbing at her eyes with a crumpled tissue. Where is he? I asked, skipping any pleasantries. They took him back, she sniffed. Said it might be his heart. I nodded and sat down. An hour passed. Then a doctor emerged. Family of Richard Thompson? We stood. He's stable, the doctor said. It wasn't a heart attack. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was a severe anxiety attack, combined with his high blood pressure. We've given him something to relax, but he needs to manage his stress levels. The doctor gave me a meaningful look, as if he could see right through our family dynamic. My mother exhaled dramatically. Thank God. Then, without missing a beat, "The mortgage is due tomorrow, Jack." I turned and stared at her. My father had just been hospitalized, and all she cared about was the goddamn mortgage. The doctor had literally just told her he needed less stress, and she was trying to pull me back in. Something inside me snapped. "You heard the doctor," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Maybe if you stopped worrying about money so much, Dad wouldn't be in the hospital." She flinched, but I didn't stop. "I'll cover today's hospital bill," I said. "That's it, Jack." "No." I turned and walked out, leaving my mother standing there, speechless. For the first time in my entire life, she had nothing left to say. The final straw. I pulled into our driveway just past midnight, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The weight of what had just happened, what I had just done, pressed heavy on my chest. For 38 years, I had been their safety net, their emergency fund, their personal ATM. Tonight, I had finally severed the cord. Laura was waiting for me. She sat on the front steps, 2 steaming mugs of tea beside her. The porch light cast a warm glow around her, and for a moment, just seeing her there, waiting, understanding on my side, made my breath come a little easier. I climbed the steps and sat beside her. "How's your dad?" she asked softly. I sighed, rubbing my hands over my face. "Not a heart attack, just an anxiety attack." She nodded, but I saw the flicker of something else in her expression. She knew what I wasn't saying. "And your mom?" she asked. I let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "She asked me for the mortgage money while I was paying the ER bill." Laura exhaled sharply. "Of course she did." I told her no. Silence. Then, a slow, proud smile spread across her lips. I turned toward her, shaking my head. "You're not surprised, are you?" "Nope." She picked up one of the mugs and handed it to me. I knew this was coming. It was just a matter of when. I stared down at the tea, watching the steam swirl into the night air. It's like seeing her try to manipulate me, even in a crisis, just confirms I made the right choice. "You did." I met her eyes, searching for doubt, for hesitation, anything that might make me question myself. There was none, just steady, unwavering support. "Come inside," she said, nudging my knee. "You need sleep." I didn't argue. For the first time in years, I thought maybe I'd actually be able to sleep without the weight of my parents' demands pressing down on me. The next morning, I woke up to 15 unread messages from Melissa, each one nastier than the last. "You abandoned Mom and Dad when they needed you most. You're a disgrace. Hope you enjoy watching them get evicted. Mom is sobbing because of you. Sleep while knowing you broke her heart." I deleted them without responding. By noon, she was blocked. I had nothing to say to her anymore. Days passed, then a week, and just when I thought maybe, just maybe, I had finally broken free, my mother showed up on my doorstep. It was a Saturday morning. I had just gotten back from taking the kids to their swimming lessons when I saw her. Standing there, waiting. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled. Her eyes were red and swollen. A far cry from the immaculately put-together woman who had spent my entire childhood obsessed with appearances. I stepped out of the car, shutting the door behind me. She took a shaky breath. "Jack." I didn't say anything. I just waited. Her lip trembled. "We're going to lose the house." There it was. Not "I'm sorry." Not "I was wrong." Not "we should have treated you and your kids better." Just a demand. A plea for money. "Is that what you want?" she continued, her voice breaking. "To see your own parents homeless at our age?" I crossed my arms, leaning against the car. "What I wanted," I said slowly, "was for my children to be treated like they mattered. What I wanted was to feel like more than just a wallet to you." Her eyes flashed with something sharp. Anger. "This isn't about sibling rivalry, Jack," she snapped. "This is about our home." "No," I said evenly. "This is about consequences." She flinched like I had slapped her. For years, I had let her dictate the rules. The emotional blackmail. The guilt trips. But not anymore. "Jack." Her voice softened, switching to that pleading, manipulative tone. "We raised you. Fed you. Put clothes on your back. We gave you everything. There it was. The unspoken contract. I owe you forever because you did the bare minimum as parents. I owe you nothing, I said. Her breath hitched, not because she was hurt, but because she realized in real time that I was done. I'll pay for a senior living facility, I said after a long pause. 3 months. After that, you're on your own. Shock flickered across her face, then rage. You'd really do this to your own mother? No, I said, shaking my head. You did this to yourself. And then, just like she had done to me my entire life, I closed the door in her face. That night, Kevin called. They kicked me out, he said, his voice shaking, because I wouldn't beg you for money. I gritted my teeth. What about your stuff? I got most of it out when I moved into my apartment, but they're holding some of my childhood things hostage. Dad said I can have them back when I come to my senses and help the family. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. Unbelievable. I'm sorry, Kev. It's fine, he said, though I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. It's just stuff. But it wasn't. It was about control. They're never going to change, are they? He asked. No, I said simply. They aren't. He was quiet for a moment. Guess I should have walked away a long time ago, he murmured. I let out a breath. We both should have. There was a long pause before he spoke again. Dinner Sunday? A small smile tugged at my lips. Yeah, I said. Dinner Sunday. It's been 8 months since I closed that door. 3 months ago, my father had a stroke. Melissa called, voice trembling, for the first time since I blocked her. He's asking for you, she said. Laura and I were at a lakeside cabin, our first real vacation in years. I felt my blood pressure spike the moment I saw Melissa's name on my phone. What do you want to do? Laura asked, covering my hand with hers. I stared at the message, torn between decades of conditioning and my newfound boundaries. I'm not even sure this is real, I admitted. They manipulated me before just to get me back on the hook. Laura nodded. Call the hospital. Confirm it's real before you make any decisions. Solid advice. I made the call, and, to my surprise, Richard really was in the hospital. This time, it wasn't a game. We cut our weekend short and drove 2 hours back to town. But the moment I walked into that hospital room and saw him lying there weak, frail, and still trying to manipulate me, I realized something. Some people will never change, and some things aren't worth saving. The final goodbye. Walking into the hospital, I felt nothing. No fear, no sadness, just emptiness. Laura squeezed my hand as we entered the waiting room. Melissa was already there, her mascara streaked down her face, her usual smugness replaced with something resembling exhaustion. Diane sat beside her, wringing her hands, looking 10 years older than when I'd last seen her. But Kevin? Kevin wasn't here. Of course, he wasn't. They hadn't called him, because in their eyes, he didn't matter. Just like my kids didn't. Melissa's red-rimmed eyes widened in shock when she saw me. You actually came, she murmured. I shrugged. I'm here for information. That's all. Diane stood shakily. Jack, thank God. Her voice cracked, but there was no relief in her eyes. Just calculation. He's been asking for you. He wants to see you while he still can. Did you call Kevin? I asked, ignoring her theatrics. Melissa and Diane exchanged a guilty look. Of course, they hadn't. I pulled out my phone and dialed him. Dad's in the hospital, I said when he picked up. Come if you want. Kevin sighed on the other end. I'll think about it. Fair enough. Without another word, I walked past my mother and sister, pushing open the heavy hospital door. The moment I stepped into Richard's hospital room, I knew nothing had changed. He looked smaller somehow. His once imposing presence had been reduced to a frail man hooked up to beeping machines. His right side was paralyzed, his speech slurred. But the first words out of his mouth. Need your help. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Just another demand. His fingers twitched as if reaching for me. Medical bills. Your mother can't manage alone. I stared at him. Even here, even now, after a stroke had nearly killed him, all he cared about was money. I exhaled slowly. Is that really why you wanted to see me? Richard blinked, confused. Family helps family. No, I said, shaking my head. In this family, I give and you take. That system is over. His face twitched, frustration creeping in. Ungrateful, he slurred. I almost laughed. Even half paralyzed in a hospital bed, He couldn't help but try to belittle me. I turned toward the door. "I'll cover today's medical bill," I said, voice steady. After that, we're done. A strangled sound left his throat, something between a scoff and a whimper. But I didn't turn back. I was finished. When I stepped into the waiting room, Diane practically lunged toward me. "Well," she asked breathlessly. "What did he say? Did he ask about the mortgage? About the bills?" I let out a short, humorless chuckle. "He didn't ask about his grandkids, if that's what you mean." Diane's face twisted in frustration. "Jack, be serious. We can't afford this. We need you. We need you. Not we love you. Not we're sorry. Just we need your money." I stared at her, really looked at her. The woman who had raised me. The woman who had spent her entire life obsessed with status, with appearances, with everything except being a mother. I took a deep breath. "No," I said, my voice calm. "Final." Diane's lip trembled. "You'd really abandon your own parents?" I tilted my head. "Funny. You abandoned me a long time ago." I turned and walked out. 3 weeks later, Diane showed up at my workplace. I had just wrapped up a client meeting when I spotted her standing by my car, arms crossed, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. She didn't even try to fake pleasantries. "We're being evicted next week." I leaned against my car, arms crossed, and her voice wobbled. "Melissa's gone. She moved to Colorado to stay with a friend. Said she can't deal with the stress anymore." Of course she had. The second the well dried up, she bolted. Diane looked up at me, eyes pleading. "I have nowhere to go, Jack." For a moment, just a moment, I felt the old guilt trying to creep in. Then I thought about Emma clutching that homemade card she never got to give her grandmother. I thought about Tyler, confused, hurt, trying to understand why his own grandparents didn't want him at their table. And I felt nothing. "There's a decent senior living facility on Oakwood Drive," I said finally. "I'll cover 3 months." "That's it." Her face flickered between shock and rage. "You'd really do this to your own mother?" she whispered. I met her gaze, unwavering. "No, Mom, you did this to yourself." And I walked away. That night, as Laura and I sat on the back deck, watching the kids chase fireflies, she nudged me gently. "You okay?" I took a deep breath, feeling the night air fill my lungs. For the first time in my life, I wasn't weighed down by my parents' needs, their demands, their manipulations. I wasn't their wallet anymore. I wasn't their scapegoat. I was free. I looked at Laura, then at our kids, laughing and happy, safe. And I smiled. "Yeah," I said, exhaling. "I really think I am. Breaking the cycle. It's been 8 months since I cut them off." Richard's health has declined fast. The doctors say he has less than a year left. Do I feel guilty? No. His health problems were self-inflicted. Years of stress, bad choices, and treating everyone around him like garbage. Melissa never came back from Colorado. Last I heard, she's bartending and still gambling. Some people never change. Diane? She lasted 2 months in the senior living facility before trying to guilt me into paying for an upgrade. I blocked her number. Kevin, on the other hand, is doing great. He has a new job, a steady girlfriend, and, most importantly, he's free too. He comes over for dinner every Sunday. The kids adore him. Tyler especially looks up to him. They bond over video games and coding projects. It's funny. After all these years of being raised in such a toxic home, Kevin and I are finally building the family we should have had all along. Sometimes, people ask if I miss my parents. I don't. What I miss is the idea of parents. The kind who love unconditionally, who don't play favorites, who don't manipulate. But that's not who they were. And now I have peace. Now, my children will never have to question whether they are loved. Now, I have a certainty that the cycle ends with me. Because sometimes, family isn't who raised you. It's who you choose. And I choose myself. I choose my children. I choose freedom. And I've never looked back. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more real-life family dramas. Let me know in the comments what you think about today's story. Was it fair or totally messed up? See you in the next one.